Hello, my name is Jaden, and this week I'm going to be going over a little bit about CSS cascading and inheritance, or more specifically, CSS specificity. I think it's called, that's what it's called. It is, specificity, something like that. But it's going to be about inheritance and where attributes come from in CSS and how they get passed down and how they can be overridden. And so let's do an example real quick. And let me bring this up. Okay, so for example, there are three ways you can write CSS and implement it with your HTML. The first way is you could just be doing inline, where if you are writing, for example, an image tag and you've got your source, and say you want to control the width. And you can control the width right here. You could say you want it to be 30 pixels and that's it. And so that would be an example of inline, where you're just going to do a little bit of style right there. It changes the image 30 pixels and very simple. That way, maybe you're writing just a simple HTML sheet and you don't want a full CSS sheet. But that's one way to do it. Another way you could do it is if you were, for example, to write a page. I'll paste a simple one here and see it show up down there. You could do a style tag like that. And you could write all of your CSS code within these tags. And that would just be an internal way to write it. I wouldn't recommend it too much. It's good for some smaller pages, but I would keep it more writing it on its own separate CSS page and linking it. So with inheritance and whatnot, so if you look down here, we've got, well, just a simple HTML opening and closing. We've got our body, and in that body we have a title, a div, and a section within our div. And this is what it gives us, very simple. And we could say that we want the body to have a background color of green, for example. It should change everything to green, just like that. And it'll all stay green unless we get specific and we say that the div, which is everything from here to here, we want that div to have a background color of blue. So it should change just the div down there to blue. Now, what we can see right here, we see that this is blue, everything else is green. But what you should note is that the div does inherit from the body. So this div is green, but it's got a layer of blue over it, which is why we see the blue. And this will make sense in a minute, but that's what it means by inheritance. So the parent and the child, and then you can go even more specific with that section we put in there and give it a background color of red. And it should change just that little section that we did right here to red. And that will override it to be red. As you can see, we're being more specific. And it's still important to note that even though it's red here, it's blue behind the red and it's green behind the blue, even though we just see green, blue, red here. And we could override any of them. So for example, the div, we could say that we want a background color of red as well. And when we do that, since this div is the last thing it reads, when the browser reads the file, it'll read from the top to the bottom. And it'll go down, it'll read this div first, make it blue, but then since it reads this div last and makes it red, it will end it at red. And we can also just bypass this blue that we put here, and we can just put inherit, which will just go back to whatever its parent it inherited from, the top parent, which it was originally green, and that was the parent. And so instead of the child being blue and this child being something else, that we've decided just to go back to the parent, and it changed back to green. But we can also change it to whatever we want. We can make it blue again. We can do orange, and the lower one will always be the one that overrides it. It's the most specific. And so it's a pretty easy concept. It can obviously get more complex with very large HTML codes and CSS codes, but I wouldn't recommend writing too many divs. You know, just leave it to, if you just want like one general div to do a background color of the blue, you can do that, but most of the time you'll be using IDs and classes, which I'm sure you've already learned about, where this same concept still applies to that. I'm just using this for simplicity, but overall that's just inheritance and specificity in a nutshell. And well, yeah.